Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Charles. Today we have the fifth part in the French fairy tale of Ourson, The Toad Again. We last left with Violette having a prophetic dream, and Agnella revealing to Ourson the events that preceded his birth. And in true form, to this particular tale, not to her mischievous fairies in general, Countess de Ségur is not going to keep us waiting. We're gonna see how true this prophecy becomes today. This is The Toad Again. Some years passed away in this peaceful manner without the occurrence of any remarkable event. Ourson and Violette both grew rapidly. Agnella thought no more of Violette's frightful dream. Her vigilance had greatly relaxed, and she often allowed her to walk alone or under the care of Ourson. Ourson was now 15 years of age, and he was tall and strong. No one could say whether he was handsome or homely, for his long black hair covered his body and face entirely. He was good, generous, and loving, always ready to render a service, always contented and cheerful. Since the day when he had found Violette in the wood, his melancholy had disappeared. He was utterly indifferent to the general antipathy which he inspired, and he no longer walked in uninhabited places, but lived happily in the circle of the three beings whom he cherished and who loved him supremely. Violette was now 10 years old, and she had not lost a single sweet charm of her beauty in growing up. Her eyes were softer and more angelic, her complexion fresher and purer, her mouth was more beautiful and arch in its expression. She had grown much in height, was tall, light, and graceful, with her rich blonde hair, when unbound, fell to her feet, and entirely enveloped her like a veil. Passerose had the care of this superb hair, and Agnella never ceased to admire it. Violette had learned many things during those 7 years. Agnella had taught her how to do housework. In other things, Ourson had been her teacher. He had taught her to read, write, and keep accounts, and he often read aloud to her while she was sewing. Instructive and amusing books were found in her room without anyone knowing where they came from. There was also clothing and other necessary objects for Violette, Ourson, Agnella, and Passerose. There was no longer any necessity for going to market to sell, or to the neighboring village to buy. Through the agency of the ring on Agnella's little finger, everything they wished for, or had need for, was speedily brought to them. One day, when Ourson was walking with Violette, she stumbled against a stone, fell, and hurt her foot. Ourson was frightened when he saw his cherished Violette bleeding. He did not know what to do to relieve her. He saw how much she suffered, for notwithstanding all her efforts, she could not suppress the tears which escaped from her eyes, but finally he remembered that a brook flowed not 10 paces from them. "Dear Violette," he said, "lean upon me, and we will endeavor to reach the rivulet. The fresh water will relieve you." Violette tried to walk while Ourson supported her. He succeeded in seating her on the borders of the stream, where she took off her shoe and bathed her delicate little foot in the fresh flowing water. "I will run to the house, dear Violette, and bring some linen to wrap up your foot. Wait for me. I shall not be long absent, and take good care not to get near the stream, for this little brook is deep, and if you slip you might drown." When Ourson was out of sight, Violette felt an uneasiness, which she attributed to the pain caused by her wound. An unaccountable repulsion made her feel inclined to draw her foot from the water in which it was hanging. Before she decided to obey this strange impulse, she saw the water troubled, and the head of an enormous toad appeared upon the surface. The great, swollen, angry eyes of the loathsome animal were fixed upon Violette, who since her dream had always had a dread of toads. The appearance of this hideous creature, its monstrous, swollen body and menacing glance, froze her with such horror that she could neither move nor cry out. "Ah, ha! You are at last in my domain, little fool," said the toad. "I am the Fairy Furious, the enemy of your family. I have been lying in wait for you a long time, and should have had you before if my sister the Fairy Drolette had not protected you and sent you a dream to warn you against me. Ourson, whose hairy skin is a talisman of safety, is now absent. My sister is on a journey, and you are at last mine." Saying these words, she seized Violet's foot with her cold and shining paws and tried to draw her down into the water. Violet uttered the most piercing shrieks. She struggled and caught hold of the plants and shrubs growing on the borders of the stream. The first at last gave way, and Violet in despair seized hold of others. "Ourson! Ourson! Oh, help! Help, dear Ourson! Save me! Save your poor Violet! I am perishing! Save me! Help! Help!" The fairy, furious in the form of a toad, was about to carry her off. The last shrub had given way, and Violet's last cry was hushed. The poor Violet disappeared under the water just as another cry, more despairing, more terrible, answered to her own. But alas! Her hair alone appeared above the water when Ourson reached the spot, breathless and panting with terror. He had heard Violet's cries, and turned back with the rapidity of lightning. Without a moment's hesitation, he sprang into the water and seized Violet by her long hair, but he felt instantly that he was sinking with her. The fairy, furious, was drawing them to the bottom of the stream. He knew he was sinking, but he did not lose his self-possession. Instead of releasing Violet, he seized both her arms and invoked the fairy Drolette. When they reached the bottom, he gave one vigorous stroke with his heel, which brought him again to the surface. Holding Violet securely with one arm, he swam sturdily with the other, and through some supernatural force he reached the shore, where he deposited the unconscious Violet. Her eyes were closed, her teeth tightly clenched, and the pallor of death was on her face. Ourson threw himself on his knees by her side, weeping bitterly. Brave Ourson, whom no dangers could intimidate, no privation, no suffering could master, now wept like a child. His sweet sister, so well beloved, his only friend, his consolation, his happiness, was lying there motionless, lifeless. Ourson's strength and courage had deserted him, and he sank down without consciousness by the side of his beloved Violet. At this moment a lark flew rapidly up, approached Violet, and Ourson gave one stroke of her little beak to Ourson and another to Violet, and disappeared. Ourson was not the only one who replied to the shrieks of Violet. Passerose had heard them, and then the more terrible cry of Ourson which succeeded them. She ran to the house to apprise Agnella, and they both ran rapidly toward the stream from which the cries for help seemed to come. On approaching, they saw with surprise and alarm that Violet and Ourson were lying on the ground in a state of unconsciousness. Passerose placed her hand on Violet's heart and felt it still beating. Agnella ascertained at the same moment that Ourson was still living. She directed Passerose to take Violet home, undress her, and put her to bed while she endeavored to restore consciousness to Ourson with salts and other restoratives before conducting him to the farm. Ourson was too tall and heavy to be carried, while Violet, on the contrary, was light, and it was easy for Passerose to carry her to the house. When she arrived there, she was soon restored to animation. It was some moments before she was conscious. She was still agitated with a vague remembrance of terror, but without knowing what had alarmed her. During this time the tender care of Agnella had restored Ourson to life. He opened his eyes, gazed tenderly at his mother, and threw himself weeping upon her neck. "Mother, dear mother," he exclaimed, "my Violet, my beloved sister, has perished. Let me die with her." "Be composed, my son," replied Agnella. "Violet still lives. Passerose has carried her to the house, and will bestow upon her all the attention she requires." Our son seemed to revive on hearing these words. He rose and wished to run to the farm, but his second thought was consideration for his mother, and he restrained his impatience to suit her steps. On their way to the farm he told his mother all that he knew of the events which had almost cost Violet and himself their lives. He added that the slime from the mouth of the fairy Furious had left a strange dullness in his head. Agnella now told him how Passerose and herself had found them stretched unconscious upon the border of the stream. They soon arrived at the farm, and Ourson, still dripping, rushed into Violet's presence. On seeing him, Violet remembered everything, and she sprang towards him. She threw her arms around him and wept upon his bosom. Ourson also wept, and Agnella and Passerose were both in tears. It was a concert of emotion, enough to soften all hearts. Passerose put an end to it by crying out, "Would not one say that we were the most unfortunate people in the universe? Look at our poor Ourson, wet as a water reed, bathing himself in his own and Violette's tears. Courage, children, courage and happiness! See, we are all alive, thanks to Ourson." "Oh, yes," interrupted Violet. "Thanks to Ourson, to my dear, well-beloved Ourson. How shall I ever repay him for all that I owe him? How can I ever testify my profound gratitude, my tender affection?" "By loving me always as you do now, my dear Violet, my sister. If it has indeed been in my power to render you some little service, have you not changed my whole existence? Have you not made me gay and happy, me who was so wretched and so miserable before? Are you not every day and every hour of the day the consolation and happiness of my life and that of my excellent mother?" Violet was still weeping, and she answered only by pressing more tenderly to her heart her Ourson, her adopted brother. "Dear son," said his mother, "you are dripping wet. Go and change your clothing. Violet has need of some hours' repose. We shall meet again at dinner." Violet consented to go to bed, but did not sleep, for her heart was melting, overflowing with gratitude and tenderness. She sought in vain for some means of rewarding the devotion of Ourson. She could think of no other way than that of trying to become perfect, so as to increase the happiness of Ourson and Daniela. And that is part 5 of the French fairy tale of Ourson, the Toad Again. We see the resurgence of the Fairy Furious, and the completion of the prophecy that was told in the previous chapter, The Dream. I really do love this story, and I hope you're enjoying it as well. It's just fabulous, and we're going to continue this tale until it is completed. This is Dan Scholes for the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com, where you'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Don't forget that if you enjoy the podcast, please head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen and leave a rating or a review. It helps other people find the show, and quite frankly, I love each and every one of them. As always, thank you so much for listening.